Let me tell you this story, folks. It's about a guy named Jan.
This is what's interesting about Silicon Valley. There are failures and there are successes. And for these guys who are now obviously billionaires, this was a huge success.
Launched things like voice calls, for example, last year, and we've launched things like a web client for WhatsApp.
In February 2014, a man walked into a nondescript government building in Mountain View, California. Not a boardroom, not a law firm, not Facebook headquarters. A welfare office. He sat down at the door of that building and signed a piece of paper. That piece of paper confirmed the sale of his company to Facebook for $19 billion, the largest acquisition of a venture-backed startup in history at the time. The building he chose to sign it in was the same one where 22 years earlier he had stood in line with his mother to collect food stamps. His name was Jan Koum, and the gap between those two moments, the food stamps and the $19 billion, is one of the most extraordinary stories Silicon Valley has ever produced. Not because of a clever pivot, or a lucky break, or the right connections, but because of what he carried with him from a small Ukrainian village that had no hot water, no reliable electricity, and a telephone his family was afraid to use. This is that story. If you're new here, we cover stories like this every week. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Jan Koum was born in 1976 in Fastiv, a small town outside Kyiv, in what was then the Soviet Union. His home was modest, in the way that word doesn't quite cover it. No hot water, electricity that came and went. A school so basic that children walked outside in Ukrainian winters to use outdoor bathrooms. His father worked construction. His mother stayed home. They were not political dissidents. They were just a Jewish family trying to be invisible in a country that had spent decades making life difficult for Jewish people. There was a telephone in the house, but his mother rarely used it. She was convinced it was tapped by the KGB. So the family communicated carefully, quietly, always aware that someone might be listening. That fear of surveillance, of being watched, of having your private words taken and used against you, settled into Jan Koum like a splinter he would carry for the rest of his life. In 1992, when Koum was 16, his mother made a decision. They were leaving. Anti-Semitism in Ukraine was getting worse, not better. She packed what she could. Their suitcases were mostly filled with pens and Soviet-issued notebooks for his schooling. His father planned to follow later. He never made it out. He died in Ukraine in 1997 before he ever saw his son again. Mountain View, California, in 1992 was not the gleaming tech hub it would later become. For a 16-year-old who spoke almost no English, it was simply somewhere new to be poor. The family moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment paid for by government assistance. His mother cleaned houses and babysat other people's children. Jan swept floors at a grocery store. They stood in line at the North County Social Services office for food stamps. His mother was diagnosed with cancer not long after they arrived. She fought it for years on disability income. But here's where the story quietly starts to turn. That same grocery store where Koum swept floors, sold used books, he started buying computer networking manuals, sometimes reading them and returning them when he couldn't afford to keep them. He had no formal training, no computer science classes, no mentor, just used books. An obsessive focus. Within 2 years of arriving in America, he had taught himself programming. Not from a university course, from the shelves of a grocery store. By the time he was 19, he had connected with an elite underground hacking group called W00T00 and was learning cybersecurity from some of the sharpest self-taught engineers in the country. One of those engineers was a young man named Brian Acton. In 1997, Koum landed a job as a security tester at Ernst & Young. During a client assignment, he was sent to audit a company called Yahoo. He so impressed the engineers there that they hired him directly. He spent the next decade at Yahoo as an infrastructure engineer, building systems at massive scale. It was at Yahoo that he met Brian Acton properly, the quiet, principled Stanford graduate who would become his closest friend and eventually his co-founder. They were different in almost every way. Acton came from money. Koum came from nothing. Acton was methodical and calm. Koum was intense and private. But they shared something important: a deep distrust of advertising, of companies that harvested user attention and sold it. They watched Yahoo build its business on ads and felt, over time, that the whole model was wrong. In 2007, burned out and disillusioned, both of them quit. They applied for jobs at Facebook. Facebook rejected both of them. They went to South America for a year and played Ultimate Frisbee. In 2009, Koum bought his first iPhone. He had watched the App Store launch and he saw something most people missed. The smartphone was about to become the primary communication device for billions of people, including billions in countries where SMS was expensive, where international calls were unaffordable, where people like his mother would have given anything to reach family without paying by the minute. He had an idea. Simple, almost embarrassingly simple. An app that showed you the status of your contacts. At the gym, in a meeting, on the way. So you knew when to reach them. He called it WhatsApp, a play on What's Up. He built the first version himself. It crashed constantly. Nobody used it. He nearly quit 3 times in the first few months. Each time, Acton told him to give it a few more months. Then Apple updated the iPhone to support push notifications. Everything changed overnight. Koum saw what the technology could actually do, scrapped the status concept, and rebuilt WhatsApp as a pure messaging app. No ads, no data collection, no profiles, just messages. Clean, fast, reliable, private. He and Acton incorporated WhatsApp Inc. on February 24, 2009, Koum's birthday. Acton invested $250,000 of his own money. They kept the team tiny on purpose. By 2013, WhatsApp had 200 million active users and 50 employees. 50. At most, tech companies' 200 million users would mean thousands of engineers. They had 50. The reason was the product itself. It worked. It didn't need a sales team because it didn't sell anything. It didn't need a marketing department because it spread by word of mouth, across entire countries, across language barriers, across continents. In India, Brazil, Nigeria, Germany, places where SMS costs were high and smartphone ownership was exploding, WhatsApp became the way people talked. In early 2014, Mark Zuckerberg called. He had been watching WhatsApp's growth for months. The app was adding 1 million users a day. He flew to Koum's house and spent hours talking, not just about the numbers, about the philosophy, about why the product worked, about what it meant to build something people actually needed. On February 19, 2014, Facebook agreed to acquire WhatsApp for $19 billion. Koum had one condition. The app would stay independent, no ads, no data mining. The principles that had made it everything it was would not be touched. And then he drove to the welfare office. He didn't bring a photographer. He didn't post about it. He sat at the door of the North County Social Services building, the same building where a teenage immigrant had once stood in line with his mother. And he signed the papers. In 2018, he left quietly the way he did most things. The reason was simple. Facebook wanted to monetize WhatsApp's user data. Koum refused. He walked away from nearly $1 billion in unvested stock, rather than violate the privacy promise he had made to his users. The boy who grew up in a house where the phone went unspoken because someone might be listening had built a communications platform used by 2 billion people, and walked away from $1 billion rather than let anyone listen in. His mother never made it to see the sale. She died in 2014, years before it happened. But when asked about his motivations over the years, Koum returned to the same place again and again: the Soviet apartment, the tapped phone, the fear of being heard. He built WhatsApp for her, for everyone who ever needed to reach someone they loved without the whole world watching. If you want more stories like this, there's a playlist on this channel. And if this one taught you something new, hit like. It helps more people find these stories. See you in the next one.